I call the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure order. Pursuant to Committee Rule 5F and the House Rule 11-2H4, the Chair may postpone further proceedings today on a question of approving any measure or matter or adopting any amendment on which a recorded vote of the yeas and the nays are ordered. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. Today, this is probably the last time I'll say this stuff. This is at least in a markup. I don't know if we're going to have any kind of hearing in lame duck, because I think we're going to all be leaving here on Friday. So again, this being the last markup, I was with Father Conroy over the weekend, and I thought, you know, nobody's ever opened up a committee hearing that I know of with a prayer, and I know I certainly can use prayers. But, you know, you're supposed to start the prayer at the beginning of the game or the beginning of the meeting or the beginning of the feast, not at the end, but what the heck. I figured now's as good a time as ever. So with that, I would yield to Father Conroy for a prayer.
I think it's great. So let us bow our heads in prayer. Loving God of all creation, we gather together in this august setting for the final markup of the 115th Congress. We thank you for the many years of faithful attention by all the members of this committee to a most central cog in what makes our nation so productive and successful, its infrastructure. We are particularly grateful for those who are serving in their final transportation markup, and most especially for the retiring chairman. Bless these proceedings today, and bless those staffers who have worked with the committee countless hours in producing the bill under consideration. May all that is done here this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Father. I don't think I've ever heard a prayer that had infrastructure in it. So it's another highlight of my career. Well, yeah, they take the Lord's name in vain sometimes about infrastructure, but never in a prayer. Thank you, Father. Appreciate you taking the time. Before we begin the business meeting, I want to acknowledge members who are departing committee. Republican members, not here, Jimmy Duncan. I don't know if you folks saw, they wrote a story about Jimmy Duncan. There's been a Duncan in Congress for 50 years. They had a headline, I forget which one of the Hill newspapers that did it, but when I retired, there's 46 years of Schuster, we didn't get a headline. So they must not like me. It was probably Politico. Yes. Times two. But Jimmy Duncan's leaving, Frank Lo-Biondo. Frank's been in Congress for, I guess, about 22 years. Lou Barletta. Lou's hopefully going off and going to change the world over across the way. We'll have somebody over there we can work with more often. So good luck to you, Lou. Mark Sanford and Todd Rokita. Neither are here, but wish you all well. And Democrats on the committee, Mike Capuano served a heck of a long time. Not as long as DeFazio. That's Rick Nolan, who he's lost his mind twice to run for Congress. He didn't get enough the first time. And Elizabeth Esty, heading back to Connecticut. Elizabeth, it's great having you on the committee. All of you, really, what a bunch of fine people. And with the departures, the House will be losing over 120 years of a collective experience. So that's hard to replace. Appreciate your service, your contributions, and it's been really a pleasure serving with all of you. And I guess I should say I'm leaving too. I didn't mention that, but I think everybody knows that. So again, for me, it's been a great an honor. It's been a joy, and it's been a heck of a lot of fun being able to pass legislation the way we have. Our committee, over the last 3 Congresses, we've produced a credible amount of legislation. And again, that's, I believe, mainly because we try to work together in a bipartisan fashion. We don't always agree, but I think we've been able to find the common ground and move forward. I also want to acknowledge the staff of the Office of Legislative Counsel, 2 of whom are with us here today, Karen Anderson and Stephen Hegaboo. Did I get it? I've been practicing that. As well as Rosemary Gallagher, who I don't believe is here today. You folks have worked tirelessly, and we really appreciate your efforts to clean up the language. We think we're doing the right thing, but you folks are really the experts, and we appreciate what you've been doing, the technical expertise in drafting legislation. We could not have produced the quality work we have for the last 6 years without your dedicated hard work. Finally, I want to acknowledge the committee staff committee staff member who's retiring this year after a long and distinguished career. Tracy Mosby, who happens to be from the, is Tracy here? She happens to be from the 9th Congressional District, which is my district. Hopefully her mother votes for me, or not going to vote for me anymore, but certainly appreciate Tracy working with us. She came to Capitol Hill in 1992. She worked for the other BS, Bud Schuster. She began when he began his tenure in committee in 1999, she came to the committee, but she started on Capitol Hill in 92 in his personal office. In total, she has spent 26 years working for House under Chairman Bud Schuster, Don Young, Jim Oberstar, John Mica, and myself. Her official job title has been committee clerk, but she has truly been a jack of all trades, and we will miss her greatly, or the committee will miss her greatly and her efforts. So thank you, Tracy, for all these years of service, and thanks for putting up with not one Schuster, but two. So on to business. So now we're going to get down to work today. So I came ready to work. My staff asked me not to wear this shirt, huh? Now, denim's...
I don't have one of those, but I rolled them.
Denim's supposed to be here with a pair of scissors. So any of you that want to, want to roll your sleeves up or cut your sleeves off, when Denim gets here, he's going to cut them off for you. But it's dangerous. There you go, Cap. It's dangerous. It's dangerous to give Denim scissors, but we had to give him to somebody. He's big enough to hold you down and cut the sleeves off. Okay, so get down to work. Today, the committee will consider General Service Administration Capital Investment and Leasing Program resolutions, H.R. 6622, to designate the federal building located at 2110 First Street. And before we start, I should yield to the ranking member if you have anything. I mean, I'm yammering on here.
I might carry it at the end.
Okay.
I'll be able to.
Back to H.R. 6622 to designate the federal building located at 2110 First Street in Fort Myers, Florida, as the George W. Whitehurst Federal Building. H.R. 5158 to direct the Secretary of Transportation to request nominations for and make determinations regarding roads to be designated under the National Scenic Byways Program. Our first item for consideration are the General Services Administration Capital Investment and Leasing Programs Resolution. I ask unanimous consent to call up the resolutions in block, and they be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. Today we'll be considering 19 resolutions, approving 11 alterations, 2 construction, 5 leases, and 1 acquisition prospectus proposed in the General Services Administration's Capital Investment Leasing Program. I want to thank Subcommittee Chairman Barletta for his work on these resolutions and for continuing to push for cost savings and space reductions and providing space for federal agencies. The work of the chairman and this subcommittee over the last 5 years has saved the American taxpayers more than $4 billion. I urge approval of these resolutions in block. I now recognize Subcommittee Chairman Barletta to explain the resolutions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I start, I want to personally thank you for giving me the opportunity to serve as a chairman on the subcommittee. You probably don't know this, but after my first term, I was a mayor for 11 years. I had my own business prior to that. So I understood how important it is to work together with people. And after my first term, I was so frustrated with Congress that I told my wife I didn't want to do it anymore. I wanted to go back, maybe in the private sector. A good day for me is not making somebody look bad. A good day for me is actually getting something done. And when you asked me if I wanted to be the chair, I told my wife I'm going to give it another term, see if I could get things done. And it has been, I got to tell you, it's been the most fulfilling experience that I've had here in Congress, working in a bipartisan way. We've been able to save the taxpayers over $4 billion. And that would not have happened if it were not for you. So thank you. I've had 6 great years after the first 2 ugly years I had. But it was really this committee that, that keeps me coming back. So I want to thank you for your work.
Thank you. Thanks.
Today we are considering 19 GSA resolutions, including 11 alterations, 5 leases, 2 construction projects, and 1 acquisition. Approving these resolutions will save the taxpayer more than $700 million. Mr. Chairman, this will bring our total savings since 2013 to $4.4 billion through space reductions and consolidating agencies out of leased space. I am pleased that one of the alteration projects includes necessary work at the historic U.S. Custom House in Philadelphia. This building, in a critical location in Philadelphia, will allow GSA to ensure the building can be fully used. Also among the projects we are approving today is the purchase of the DOT headquarters. DOT is the only departmental headquarters not in a federally owned building. Unfortunately, because of outdated scoring rules, the taxpayer therefore must pay close to fair market value for this property, despite the fact that we have been leasing this property since 2006. Had GSA been able to negotiate a discounted purchase option up front, the amount needed to require this building would be much lower. To date, the government has spent $650 million leasing this building without gaining any equity. We cannot continue to waste taxpayer dollars in this manner. We have the option to purchase the building, and there is no reason not to exercise this option. Approving this purchase will avoid GSA having to enter into yet another operating lease for the DOT headquarters and will save taxpayer money in the long term. In addition, the bill I introduced, the Real Reform Act, will fix this problem for other leases by allowing GSA to negotiate discounted purchase options. I hope to see movement on that bill soon. I urge my colleagues to approve the GSA resolutions in block.
I thank the gentleman. Do any members recognize the sub-ranking member DeFazio?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly would echo the comments of the subcommittee chair. You know, sometimes we're driven by absurd rules around here. And the way we do budgets, we don't have a capital budget. Doesn't make much sense. You know, so if we're looking at infrastructure and building a 100-year bridge, theoretically it's the same obligation or debt as you know, buying fuel for the federal fleet of cars. It's not. And the other thing is that in addition to not having a capital budget, and having been driven by the budget rules, we often stick federal agencies into leased space and then pay perpetually. I just got a new VA clinic in Eugene. It's leased space. It should have been purchased. And it doesn't make sense. And in the case of the DOT, as the chairman said, we've already laid out, if we had originally bought this, it would have been a fraction of this cost, and we wouldn't have spent the amount of money was spent on the lease. But now with that neighborhood continuing to boom, this is a good price. And if we purchase the building now, we will save the federal taxpayers a good deal of money. In addition to that, it is the only cabinet-level agency that is housed in leased space. So, this is a great opportunity. We need to look for other opportunities for consolidation, sharing between agencies in being co-housed in buildings, and also, really look at, entering into, in the future, purchase agreements. And I would also raise the whole issue of the FBI building, which is not yet resolved. Unfortunately, there's currently, a push to do something totally inappropriate, which is to put part of the FBI downtown, so we won't have a hotel on that lot, and scattered around perpetually. We need to re-examine that issue. This committee should be exerting oversight on that, and hopefully that'll be a major focus in the next Congress. With that, I urge members to support this resolution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Ranking Member Titus is recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also support these 19 resolutions. They authorize acquisition, alteration, and leasing actions. They represent a concerted effort by the committee to encourage this administration, as we have done with past administrations, to consolidate government workers in a government-owned space. And our efforts, I believe, have borne fruit. Many of the resolutions direct federal agencies to increase their space utilization rate or pull federal agencies out of privately owned space into more cost-efficient and smaller government-owned space. I'm also pleased that these resolutions continue to include a provision that requires GSA to provide information on demand to both the chair and ranking member of the committee. In the past, it was just a given that the agency would provide information to members of Congress and committees of jurisdiction who request it. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case under this administration, and this provision is absolutely needed if the committee is going to conduct its constitutional responsibilities. Last summer, the committee was holding a hearing on how GSA was managing its real estate portfolio, and many of our colleagues on this side of the aisle took an opportunity to question the then acting administrator of GSA about its most highest profile holding, the old post office, which is now the Trump International Hotel. The acting administrator refused to commit to provide members of the committee with this critical information unless the chairman requested the information himself. And I would like to give Chairman Barletta credit and thank him. He followed up with a letter requesting the information that was sought by my colleagues. However, GSA took the incredulous position that although Chairman Barletta had requested the information, because the questions had come from the minority members, they were not going to provide the answers. Well, that's just not acceptable. We expect more from them, and we're going to demand more from them. So it's necessary to include that provision in the resolutions. And since this is very likely our last business meeting, I'd like to say again thank you to Chairman Barletta, not just for doing this, but for working with us across the aisle and showing such leadership on the GSA reforms. It's been a pleasure to work with him, and he'll be missed, and I wish him well. And I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. With that, do any other members wish to be heard? Seeing none, I now consider the resolution for amendment. I recognize no amendments. I now recognize Mr. Barletta for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the 19 committee resolutions be approved en bloc.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. The resolutions are approved. We'll next consider H.R. 6622 to designate the federal building located at 2110 First Street in Fort Myers, Florida as the George W. Whitehurst Federal Building. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management and call up H.R. 6622, and then be considered as read and open amendment at any point without objection. So ordered. It is my understanding that the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Barletta, will offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute to the bill. Without objection, we will call up the amendment in the nature of a substitute, and then we will give one statement on both sides of the ANS and underlying bill. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of substitute number 50, offered by Mr. Barletta.
H.R. 6622 would designate the George W. Whitehurst Federal Building in Fort Myers, Florida. And with that, I recommend that the committee favorably report this bill to the House. And now recognize Subcommittee Chairman Barletta to explain the bill and the ANS.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 6622 would designate the federal building located at 2110 First Street in Fort Myers, Florida as the George W. Whitehurst Federal Building. A lifelong public servant, Whitehurst began his career on the bench in 1916, elected as county judge in DeSoto County before being appointed to the 12th Circuit in Florida in 1919. On January 30th, 1950, Judge Whitehurst was nominated by President Harry S. Truman and confirmed to a joint appointment to new seats on the United States District Court of the Northern District of Florida and the Southern District of Florida. Whitehurst served as Chief Judge for the Southern District of Florida from 1959 to 1961 when he assumed senior status. He served in that capacity until his death in 1974. I think it is fitting to name this federal building after him. The amendment makes a technical correction to the bill. Given the building houses both federal agencies and the U.S. courts, this amendment adds United States Courthouse to the name. The amendment conforms the naming with the standard naming protocols. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now recognize Ranking Member Titus for a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also support this legislation. Judge Whitehurst was one of the longest-serving judges in South Florida. Previously, there was a federal building in U.S. Courthouse that was named for Judge Whitehurst in Fort Myers. That building was disposed of by GSA, and in 1998, a new federal building was built a few blocks from the old one. So this is only appropriate that that new building would also bear his name.
Yield back.
I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Do any other members wish to be recognized? Before I continue, I failed to introduce our new committee clerk, Mike Twincheck, who's been on the Hill for over 20 years. And I understand you've written 2 books on the history of Congress. It's probably good for all of us to read it. Why don't you stand up so everybody gets a good look at you? Because he's going to be a guy, he's a nonpartisan staff, so he's a guy that we'll all be working with. So thanks. Welcome to the committee, Mike. And with that, we'll thank you, Mr. Davis. We will now consider the bill for amendment. Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? Seeing none. If not, the questions on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The amendment is in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. I now recognize Mr. Barletta for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 6622 as amended be approved and reported favorably to the House.
Questions on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The bill is amended, approved, and ordered reported favorably to the House. Our last item for consideration is H.R. 5158 to direct the Secretary of Transportation to request nominations for and make determinations regarding roads to be designated under the National Scenic Byways Program. I ask unanimous consent to discharge the Subcommittee on Highways and Transit, call up H.R. 5158, and that it be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. It's my understanding that the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Graves, will offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute to the bill. Without objection, we will call up the amendment in the nature of a substitute, and then we will give one statement on both the ANS and the underlying bill. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of substitute number 44, offered by Mr. Graves of Missouri.
Thank the gentleman. I want to thank Mr. Cicilline. Did I pronounce that right?
Cicilline.
Cicilline, okay. And Mr. Poe for their work on this legislation. The bill requires the Department of Transportation to undertake a process to designate roads under the National Scenic Byways Program. The last time the department designated roads under the program was 2008, and I urge all members to support 5158. And now I recognize the other Mr. Graves. Good thing we have 2 Graves here, so I can't screw it up. So I recognize Mr. Graves to explain the bill and the ANS.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My father is unable to be here today and asked me to handle this for him. H.R. 5158 would direct Secretary of Transportation to solicit nominations for roads to be designated in the National Scenic Byways Program in the Federal Register. The ANS makes a few modifications to the bill, including enabling the Secretary to use a historically used process for soliciting nominations at designated roads. It incorporates a reference to the National Scenic Byways Program in Title 23 of U.S. Code and provides the Secretary with a more flexible time frame to publish the nominations, the designated roads, but still within 1 year of the nomination period. Mr. Chairman, I move that 5158, as amended, be reported favorably, approved and reported favorably to the House.
Thank the gentleman, and I have to tell you, you must take after your mother with those good looks, not your father. I hope somebody tells that to Sam Graves. I now recognize Mr. DeFazio for a statement.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Well, I strongly support this legislation. It'll create a process, to hopefully reinvigorate designation of national scenic byways. I worked on this issue with Senator Rockefeller many years ago, and it was included in the IST bill in 1991. And since that time, we've had 150 scenic roads designated, a number in my home state. And unfortunately, in MAP 21, the program the funding was eliminated. But the authority to designate was retained. Unfortunately, DOT hasn't designated anything since that time. This legislation will ensure that, once again, there's a process for states, tribes, and federal land management agencies to request designations for roads that meet the scenic byways criteria. I want to thank the sponsor of the legislation, David Cicilline from Rhode Island. He's also co-chair of the Scenic Byways Caucus, of which I'm a member, for introducing this legislation. It's bipartisan. I'm not aware of any opposition, and I urge my colleagues to support it.
I thank the gentleman. Any other members wish to be heard on the? I want to make a note for the record that Mr. Desaulniers is wearing a short-sleeve shirt also, so there you go. We will now consider the bill for amendment. Are there any amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? If not, the question is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor? Your son did it for you. Question amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it. The amendments in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. I now, which Mr. Graves am we supposed to recognize now? The father or the son? I recognize the younger Graves.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk asking unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read.
Questions on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. The bill is as amended, is approved and ordered favorably, reported favorably to the House. All right? We're good. Okay. I ask unanimous consent that each bill ordered reported today will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of substitute, incorporating any amendments adopted without objection. So ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make all necessary technical clarifying and conforming changes to each of the bills ordered reported today to reflect the actions of the committee. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman, after consultation with the ranking member, has authority to strike or revise any provision in the bills ordered reported today that would cause a sequential referral to other committee or would cause the bills to be subject to a Budget Act or Rule 21 Cutco point of order. Without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the committee authorize the chairman or his designee to offer such motions as may be necessary in the House to go to conference with the Senate on H.R. 6622 as amended, H.R. 5158 as amended, ordered reported by the committee today, or similar Senate bills without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to Rule 5 of the Rules of the Committee of Transportation and Infrastructure, the chair notes the presence of a quorum for actions taken in all committee actions today. And with that, I yield to Mr. DeFazio.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you know, I want to echo the sentiments that you expressed at the beginning of this meeting. Transportation infrastructure, I started on this one, was the Public Works Committee. Should not be, does not need to be a partisan issue. I mean, we got lots of other things to disagree on around here. And just like Subcommittee Chairman Barletta said, I mean, being on this committee has kept me here through some dark times because we still actually get things done. Other than the tax bill, which I didn't support, I can't think of anything substantive done in this Congress except for bills that came out of this committee. Water resources, which you put back on a 2-year track. First long-term FAA reauthorization since 1982, I think even longer than one that your dad passed. The Coast Guard bill, still waiting for action in the Senate, and numerous other pieces of legislation. And it wouldn't be possible without the hard work of all the members of the committee. I particularly regret losing on my side Michael Capuano, who's unfortunately, now I'm going to have to tone it down because I don't have anyone to be more outspoken than me anymore. That's unfortunate. Oh, no. Rick Nolan and Elizabeth. And you've been a great working partner. You certainly fought hard for your side and your values, and you won a good number, and on some we drew a draw, and a couple of times we won. So I think it's all in all been a great season. So thank you. Appreciate your leadership.
I appreciate the gentleman. And I just want to say to Mr. DeFazio, first of all, thanks to all the members. Mr. DeFazio said it accurately. Working together, figuring out, hammering out these things to pass legislation. It's been a great bipartisan effort. Again, not always agreeing, but trying to figure out how to move forward. But Mr. DeFazio, or Peter, has been a great partner for 4 years. Again, we had some rough times, but most of them were good times. And like I said earlier, this is one of the great honors of my life. It's been a joy, and it's been a lot of fun to be able to pass legislation. I also want to thank the ranking members, subcommittee ranking members, and the subcommittee chairs on our side, Sam Graves, Jeff Denham, Frank Lobiondo, Duncan Hunter, Lou Barletta, and the other Graves, Garrett Graves, for their efforts and hard work on the legislation throughout the years. And a really special thanks to the Democratic staff and the Republican staff. We can't do these bills without you folks and the hard work you do. And I don't think anybody realizes that with the late nights you have to put up when we're doing these bills, like the FAA bill or the FAST Act or any of these other bills. I mean, you guys really do a fantastic job on both sides of the aisle. And I can't thank you enough for those efforts that you've put forth. Again, the FAA bill, I thought that was going to be a piece of legislation that eluded me. We've done it. We've had legislation on every mode of transportation in this Congress. We actually did an extension, 18-month extension. It really wasn't it's an extension. But I said on the floor, and I'm going to say here in the committee today, to show the true competitive nature of the Schuster family. Peter alluded to the fact that my father did a long-term, but he's looking, his eyes are moving, I see him. And I told him yesterday, we did a 5-year bill. He only did a 4.5-year bill. So I said that on the floor yesterday to make sure that that he knew, who did a better job on the FAA than in the family. And finally, must thank the folks in the 9th Congressional District that elected me to Congress, and with their great support, I would have never become chairman without the great support of those folks from back home, as well as my family, and again, to my Republican colleagues who put their trust in me and elected me to be chairman of this committee. It's, again, been a great honor for me, and I'll miss this job for 2 reasons. One, the people and the friendships that I've made, but secondly, when you're doing legislation, it can be pretty exciting. So I'll be watching from afar, hopefully telling you what I think you're doing right or wrong. I'm sure mostly right, Peter? But again, I can't thank you all enough. I can't thank you all enough for working with me and working together and being able to pass important legislation that lots of times, most of the time, it doesn't get the headlines. But we do the hard work, the labor, the backbone of the economy is moving people and moving stuff around the country. So again, thank you all for working hard on these issues. And with that, I'm going to read it. I want to get my hammer ready. With that, the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure has completed its business for the day, and the committee is adjourned.